Sterling invited me to lunch at the Gilded Spoon, a place far too sleek for its purpose, only to tell me Innovatech was going in a different direction. A euphemism I immediately understood. This came after 11 years, after I had painstakingly built the company's entire tech division practically from the ground up. My reward? I was being replaced by the owner's nephew, some fresh MBA graduate. These things happen, I managed to reply, forcing a tight, professional smile. My mind raced, connecting the subtle warnings, the strange occurrences I had dismissed over the past few months. No one at that table, not Sterling with his feigned sympathy, nor the smug nephew beside him, realized I had seen this betrayal forming for months. My name is Alexander, but most people call me Alex. I'm 42 years old. For the past 11 years, I've been the unseen, unacknowledged backbone of Innovatech Solutions IT infrastructure. You wouldn't find my name prominently featured on our glossy company website or lauded in the quarterly reports, of course. But I was the one who dragged their systems out of the digital dark ages, replacing ancient servers and haphazard practices. I built our network security from scratch, implemented robust protocols where chaos once reigned. I transformed a small, overwhelmed 5-person help desk into a capable 30-person operation. That team kept 3 critical production facilities humming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, churning out products vital to our success. The machines don't stop in Evanston, and for 11 years, neither did I. Honestly, I hadn't even planned on staying at Innovatech this long. I initially took the job as a temporary measure, stopgap after my divorce from Sophia. It was meant to be something to keep my mind occupied, a way to pay the bills while I figured out my next move after leaving Chicago. But I discovered I was good at it. Damn good. I thrived on the challenge of bringing order and efficiency to their complex manufacturing environment. And somewhere along the way, over countless late nights and stressful system upgrades, those servers, those networks, the intricate Nexus core system I developed, they became mine. Not legally, perhaps, according to the fine print I was about to be reminded of, but in every way that truly mattered: sweat, dedication, and innovation. The lunch itself was a carefully orchestrated affair at the Gilded Spoon. It was exactly the kind of trendy, expensive fusion restaurant where executives take clients they desperately want to impress, or perhaps lull into a false sense of security. Definitely not the typical setting for terminating an employee who'd given over a decade of his professional life. But Richard Sterling, our CEO, had always prioritized appearances and smooth surfaces over substance or loyalty. "Alex, you've been absolutely invaluable to Innovatech," Sterling began, his knife gliding effortlessly through his pan-seared scallops. His eyes, however, didn't quite meet mine. "But the board feels we need fresh perspectives moving forward." He paused, taking a deliberate sip of sparkling water. "Someone with a strategic vision for where technology is heading globally." The translation was insultingly clear in my mind. We found someone younger, cheaper, likely related to ownership, who won't question the board's often technically illiterate decisions. Mr. Harrington's nephew, Julian Vance, just completed his MBA at Stanford, Sterling continued, a little too brightly. A truly brilliant young man, specialized in strategic management and digital transformation. He gestured vaguely towards the nephew, Vance, who offered a practiced, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. I simply nodded, maintaining my composure, and took a slow sip of water. The ice clinked against the glass, the only sound breaking the tension. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold dread mixing with rising anger. "Who will be handling the transition process?" I asked, keeping my voice even, professional. A wave of visible relief washed over Sterling's face. Clearly, he'd expected, perhaps even hoped for, an emotional outburst. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "You'll have 6 weeks to ensure a smooth handover to Vance," he said quickly. "We plan to make the official announcement after the quarterly all-hands meeting next week." Before the artisanal dessert plates even arrived, He slid a non-disclosure agreement across the polished table. I scanned it briefly, recognizing the standard restrictive clauses. I signed it, offered another forced smile, and shook his hand firmly. I told him I understood that difficult business decisions sometimes had to be made, playing the part of the compliant employee to the very end. Back at my desk later that afternoon, the reality hit harder. I noticed immediately that my administrative credentials had already been subtly downgraded. My access to certain high-level directories was gone. My name had been quietly removed from the leadership team email distribution list. The decision hadn't been made over lunch. It had been finalized weeks ago, maybe longer. They had just waited for the opportune moment to deliver the news. That night, sleep was impossible. It wasn't just the simmering anger, though there was plenty of that boiling beneath the surface. It wasn't even the sudden fear about finding a new job at 42, though that concern flickered. No, what kept me staring at the ceiling was the chilling memory of something I discovered in the server logs 3 months prior. Small, persistent, unauthorized access attempts originating from an IP address I had painstakingly traced back to the executive floor. Someone had been covertly poking around deep within the Nexus core system, accessing documentation, security protocols, and contingency plans they had no business seeing, let alone understanding. They weren't just replacing me. They were systematically mining me for every piece of institutional knowledge, every technical shortcut, every innovation I possessed, before discarding me. The realization felt like ice water in my veins. My history with Innovatech and Evanston was tied to Sophia. I moved here from Chicago 18 years ago, following her when she got accepted into graduate school at the University of Chicago. We were young then, full of ambition and shared dreams. I'd left behind a decent IT security job in the city, figuring I'd easily find something comparable in the suburbs. Then came the divorce, 7 years into building a life together. It blindsided me completely. No big fights, no dramatic showdowns, just papers appearing suddenly on the kitchen counter one morning. "We just want different things, Alex," Sophia had said quietly, her bags already packed. No obvious warning signs I could decipher, just done. She was pursuing her own path, her own career ambitions, and I wasn't part of that future anymore. When Innovatech Solutions hired me, I felt adrift. The company, then a much smaller regional player, desperately needed someone to rebuild their failing network infrastructure after a devastating ransomware attack had crippled their operations. They saw my experience in Chicago and brought me in. It was supposed to be temporary, just a contract gig to get me back on my feet. But walking through their outdated facilities, I saw immense potential hidden beneath the surface. These were brilliant manufacturing minds, experts in materials and mechanics, but their understanding of IT was rudimentary at best. Their entire operation, millions of dollars in sophisticated equipment, hundreds of jobs, was precariously balanced on outdated, vulnerable systems. One major crash, one targeted attack, and everything could grind to a halt. Disaster felt imminent. I saw an opportunity to build something lasting. I drafted a comprehensive 5-year IT overhaul plan and pitched it directly to Sterling. To my surprise, he approved the budget and, more importantly, gave me the autonomy to execute my vision. He let me work. For the next 3 years, I practically lived in the office and the server rooms. Daylight became a distant memory. I meticulously rebuilt every network segment, designed secure architectures, implemented disaster recovery protocols, trained hesitant staff, and established robust backup and fail-safe systems. My crowning achievement during that period was Nexus Core, the bespoke manufacturing execution system I began developing even before joining Innovatech, which I then licensed and deeply integrated into their operations. It became the digital heart of their production floor. The payoff came during a massive Northeast blackout. Power grids failed across several states, but thanks to the redundant systems and backup power I had implemented, Innovatech was the only major manufacturing facility in the entire region that remained fully operational. No missed deadlines, no catastrophic losses. That got the board's attention. Sterling started inviting me to executive meetings, seeking my input on strategic decisions. My budget tripled almost overnight. I finally had the resources to hire a proper team. I brought in good, talented people like Chloe Davis, sharp and insightful, who quickly became my indispensable right hand, my project management lead. And Miguel Ortiz, a quiet but brilliant engineer who could code his way through any technical brick wall. We weren't just the IT department anymore. We were the critical enabler of Innovatech's growth and reliability. We were the reason Sterling could confidently promise clients that Innovatech would never miss a shipment deadline, regardless of external circumstances. I even remember Mr. Walter Harrington, the company founder and then majority owner, shaking my hand warmly at the company Christmas party in 2019. A rare gesture from the reclusive patriarch. "Alex, you've single-handedly turned this company into a modern operation," he'd said, genuine appreciation in his eyes. "We couldn't have achieved this level of expansion without the systems you built." For a while, I truly believed I'd found my place, a company where my contributions genuinely mattered, where I was valued. I thought I belonged. The first hairline crack in that illusion appeared last September. A team of consultants, allegedly representing Apex Global Enterprises but presented as efficiency experts, showed up unannounced to conduct a thorough audit of our digital infrastructure. They asked surprisingly basic, almost naive questions about complex systems I had personally designed and implemented years ago. When I politely inquired who had authorized this extensive review, the lead consultant vaguely mentioned the executive team and quickly changed the subject. It felt off. Then, my access privileges to the board meeting minutes folder on the shared drive suddenly vanished. The automated system notification simply read, "Server cleanup and permission recalibration." A flimsy explanation that didn't sit right. In December, Sterling began frequently canceling our long-standing weekly IT strategy briefings, always citing urgent, unavoidable conflicts in his schedule. Our regular communication channel, vital for aligning IT with business goals, effectively went silent. At the New Year's leadership retreat, an exclusive off-site event I was usually central to, I overheard Harrington talking animatedly about his nephew, Julian Vance. Just graduated from Stanford with his MBA, he boasted to another board member. Absolutely brilliant with computers, apparently. Top Silicon Valley companies are practically fighting over him. At the time, I dismissed it as harmless family pride. I should have paid more attention. The final, undeniable warning sign came from Chloe just a few weeks before the fateful lunch. She pulled me aside after a team meeting, concern etched on her face. She told me about a high-level, strategic planning session she'd been unexpectedly invited to. A session focused on future technology roadmaps, the kind I should have been leading. When she mentioned my name, suggesting my input would be crucial, Sterling had awkwardly changed the subject. "Something felt really off, Alex," Chloe had warned, lowering her voice. "It felt like they were actively planning around you, avoiding your involvement." Even then, I brushed off her concerns, attributing it to corporate politics or simple oversight. Loyal to a fault, my ex-wife Sophia used to say. She wasn't wrong. 2 days after that gut-wrenching lunch at the Gilded Spoon, I found myself standing alone in the main server room at 7 p.m. Most employees had long since gone home, leaving the floor quiet. The steady, rhythmic hum of the machinery, the blinking lights reflecting off the polished floor. It had always been a strangely calming soundscape for me. These towering racks filled with servers, the complex network of cables I'd meticulously organized, the precisely calibrated cooling systems I had selected, installed, and configured every single component. I had designed the redundancies, the failovers, the security layers. This room, more than my actual office, felt like my space. I ran my hand slowly along the cool metal edge of the main Nexus Core console. 11 years of my professional life, countless hours of intense focus and problem solving, were encapsulated within these humming walls. Working late? A voice interrupted the quiet. I turned, startled, to find Julian Vance, Mr. Harrington's nephew and my designated replacement, standing confidently in the doorway. He looked immaculate. Crisp shirt, expensive watch, an air of casual entitlement clinging to him like cologne. He couldn't have been more than 30, radiating the easy confidence of someone who's never faced real adversity. "Just running some routine checks," I replied evenly, keeping my expression neutral. "Do you need something? Getting the lay of the land?" He strode into the room as if he already owned it, his eyes scanning the racks with a look I couldn't quite decipher. Was it genuine interest or critical assessment? "Sterling mentioned you'd be showing me around the core system soon," Vance said smoothly. "Planning the knowledge transfer." "Did he now?" I kept my tone carefully non-committal. Vance paused, studying a specific server configuration diagram I had mounted on the wall. "Impressive physical setup," he commented, sounding almost condescending. "A bit old school in its architecture, perhaps, but fundamentally solid." Old school? I had personally overseen the upgrade of these exact systems less than 8 months ago, implementing cutting-edge virtualization and security measures. His ignorance was staggering. "Your documentation is remarkably thorough," he continued, turning his attention back to me. "I've been reading through your operational protocols over the past few weeks." Weeks? My blood ran cold. He'd had access long before our lunch. "I actually have some preliminary ideas for modernization and streamlining," he added, phrasing it as if he were bestowing a great favor upon me. "Replacing some of the bespoke elements with more standardized cloud solutions." He clearly had no grasp of why those bespoke elements were critical for our specific manufacturing processes. "I look forward to hearing them," I forced myself to say. The words fell like sandpaper in my mouth. After Vance finally left, radiating self-satisfaction, I slumped down at my emergency workstation in the server room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the system access logs. It was worse than I thought. Vance's high-level administrator credentials hadn't just been active for weeks. They had been created 3 full weeks before my termination lunch with Sterling. He'd already been granted top-level access, the keys to the kingdom. The logs showed he had viewed, and likely copied, my entire Nexus core documentation library, my security frameworks, everything. They weren't just replacing me, they were stripping the intellectual assets first. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and betrayal. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. A text message to Miguel Ortiz. "Can you meet tomorrow before work? Coffee at the Daily Grind? 6:30 a.m. urgent." That night, sleep eluded me again. I found myself driving aimlessly, eventually ending up at the Evanston lakefront, parking near the spot where Sophia and I used to watch the sunset over Lake Michigan. The vast expanse of water was dark and turbulent under the winter sky, mirroring the storm inside me. I thought back to the day Sterling had promoted me to Director of IT Infrastructure. He'd clapped me on the back, beaming. "You're the absolute backbone of this place, Alex," he declared enthusiastically. "We simply couldn't run this company without you and your systems." Turns out, even backbones are considered replaceable when a lucrative buyout is on the horizon. The irony was bitter. Miguel was already seated at a small table in the corner when I arrived at the Daily Grind the next morning, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. The dark circles under his eyes told me he hadn't been sleeping well either. He knew something was fundamentally wrong. "They're phasing me out, Miguel," I said bluntly, skipping the pleasantries as I sat down. He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. He wasn't surprised. "I figured as much," he admitted quietly. They've been asking some weird questions lately." "Like what?" "Having me explain parts of your Nexus core system, the integration points." He hesitated. "Asking if certain protocols were overly complex." "When did this start?" I pressed. "A couple of weeks now," he confessed, looking down into his coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry, Alex. I should have told you sooner. It felt wrong." I held up a hand. I didn't blame him. Miguel had a family, a mortgage, responsibilities. Loyalty is a luxury not everyone can afford when their livelihood is threatened. It's okay, Miguel. You didn't know the full picture. He looked up, meeting my gaze. So, what's your plan now? He asked, his voice low. Until that moment, sitting across from my most trusted engineer in the sterile quiet of the early morning coffee shop, watching the first wave of commuters hustle past the window, I hadn't fully realized I had a plan. But as he asked, something clicked inside me. A cold, hard clarity I hadn't felt since the day I found Sophia's divorce papers sitting on the kitchen counter. The shock and hurt were crystallizing into resolve. They think everything of value is documented, written down in the manuals, I said quietly, leaning in. They believe they can just hand over the keys to Vance and carry on. My voice was low, intense. But we both know that's not true, don't we? Miguel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly in understanding. The proprietary tools you built, the custom scripts. I nodded grimly. Exactly. The workarounds for hardware quirks that aren't in any official manual. The efficiency patches I developed on my own time. The custom monitoring dashboards. The specific client interface logic for Nexus Core. No one else, not even Vance with his Stanford MBA, fully understands how all the pieces truly fit together. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Look, Miguel, I'm not planning to sabotage anything, I stated firmly. That's not who I am. But I'll be damned if I'm going to just walk away and let them steal years of my intellectual property, the very systems I built that made this company attractive for acquisition. I held his gaze. I'm not giving away what is rightfully mine. Miguel studied my face for a long moment, searching for something. Then, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He understood the injustice, the betrayal. He understood what was at stake. What do you need? He asked simply. I need secure copies of everything related to Nexus Core that I developed personally, especially the pre-Innovatech code and the initial licensing agreement, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Development logs, original contracts, crucial emails with Sterling acknowledging my ownership. Anything that proves Nexus Core is mine. And Miguel, I added. I need to know who on the team is still loyal. Who can we trust? The official announcement of my transition came during the company-wide all-hands meeting the following week. Sterling stood at the podium, radiating false sincerity, talking effusively about exciting transitions and the need for fresh, strategic perspectives. Vance stood beside him, smiling politely, looking every bit the designated successor. Alex has been absolutely instrumental in building our state-of-the-art IT infrastructure, Sterling declared, his gaze sweeping across the room, but conspicuously avoiding mine. We are deeply grateful for his many contributions over the past 11 years as he helps us transition to Julian's capable leadership over the next 6 weeks. A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the large conference room. Most of my IT team looked genuinely shocked, exchanging bewildered glances. Chloe's eyes found mine from across the crowded space, conveying a silent question, a look of shared disbelief. I gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Yes, it's true. After the meeting concluded, I immediately requested a formal sit-down with Sterling and Ms. Evelyn Reed, the head of human resources. In the sterile confines of a small conference room, I calmly but firmly pointed out that several key components of the Nexus Core system, the very technology Vance was supposed to take over, were developed by me personally, often outside of normal work hours, using my own proprietary development frameworks well before I even joined Innovatech. The standard employment agreement is quite clear, Alex, Ms. Reed stated coolly, sliding a thick document across the polished table towards me. Her tone was professional, but utterly devoid of empathy. Article 4, Section B, stipulates that any technology developed or integrated during your tenure becomes the exclusive property of Innovatech Solutions. Not everything, I counted, pushing the document back gently. The core architecture and specific modules of the Nexus Core interface were demonstrably developed before I joined Innovatech 11 years ago. I licensed that core technology to the company upon my hiring, but explicitly retained ownership of the underlying intellectual property. I met Sterling's gaze directly. It's right there, documented in my original onboarding agreement and subsequent email correspondence with you, Sterling. Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair, avoiding my eyes. He clearly remembered those early discussions. That was over a decade ago, Alex, he mumbled, waving a dismissive hand. The company, the technology, everything has evolved significantly since then. Precisely, I agreed readily. Nexus Core has evolved because I evolved it. Every critical update, every performance enhancement, every successful integration with new manufacturing equipment was built upon my original licensed code. I leaned forward slightly, ensuring my voice remained calm but firm. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult here. I understand the company is moving in a new direction. My eyes flickered towards Sterling. I simply want fair and proper compensation for the intellectual property that Innovatech continues to rely on heavily. Sterling and Ms. Reed exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. A silent, corporate negotiation was happening right before my eyes. We will look into the specifics of the original agreement, Sterling said finally, his tone tight with annoyance. In the meantime, Alex, please focus your full attention on ensuring a seamless transition with Vance. That needs to be your priority. I recognized that evasive look instantly. They were stalling, hoping I'd just give up and walk away quietly with the standard severance package. They underestimated my resolve. The very next morning, my access to the primary development servers was abruptly restricted. An automated email notification cited standard security protocols during transition periods. It was a blatant obstruction tactic. Later that day, Vance called an emergency team meeting to discuss his new vision for the IT infrastructure. He didn't invite me. When I showed up anyway, having been tipped off by Chloe, Vance seemed visibly annoyed, but quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Oh, Alex. Glad you could join us," he said, his voice overly bright. "I was just outlining some essential changes I plan to implement regarding the network architecture." I leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Interesting," I replied neutrally. "Specifically?" "The main production floor systems," he announced confidently, gesturing towards a complex diagram on the whiteboard that he clearly didn't fully comprehend. "We're going to significantly streamline the existing protocols, simplify things." My blood ran cold. He had no idea what he was talking about. "Those specific protocols exist to prevent catastrophic machine failures during peak operational load," I stated evenly, keeping my voice level despite the rising alarm. "They are custom designed and calibrated for our specific, often temperamental, manufacturing equipment. They are not arbitrary." Vance's confident smile tightened at the edges. He clearly disliked being contradicted, especially in front of the team. "Well, modern, cloud-based systems don't typically require such complex, legacy workarounds," he retorted dismissively. "They're not workarounds," Chloe interjected firmly, stepping forward slightly. Her loyalty, even now, was a small comfort. "They are necessary, meticulously designed adaptations for our unique hardware configurations. Alex designed them himself after the series of costly failures back in 2018. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Several team members shifted uneasily. Vance's manufactured confidence visibly wavered for a fleeting moment. Then, regaining his composure, he sniffed dismissively. "Well, I appreciate the historical perspective," he said curtly. "But we are moving forward with the streamlining initiative as planned." He turned abruptly back to the whiteboard, picking up a marker, effectively dismissing me and any further discussion. Later that same day, I received a formal email from Innovatech's legal department. It baldly asserted the company's full and unequivocal ownership of all systems, explicitly including Nexus Core. They cited a broad, catch-all clause in the employee handbook regarding integrated technologies automatically becoming company property. As a supposed gesture of goodwill, they offered me a one-time technology acquisition bonus of a paltry $5,000. $5,000 for the system that formed the technological heart of their multi-million-dollar operation. The insult was profound. But the true, sickening betrayal came the following day. I discovered, through Miguel, that Vance had scheduled mandatory one-on-one meetings with every single member of my core IT team. These weren't transition discussions. They were full, formal job evaluations. He was systematically assessing who to keep, who aligned with his vision, and likely who remained loyal to me. Miguel texted me immediately after his meeting. He asked if your systems were really necessary or just overly complicated and inefficient. Fishing for criticism, Alex. Trying to build a case against your work. That night, checking my personal email account, I found a confused message from one of our key suppliers. They were inquiring about a new licensing agreement Innovatech had apparently sent over regarding data integration. An agreement I knew absolutely nothing about. My blood ran cold. I asked the supplier to forward the document. When it arrived, my suspicions were confirmed. Sterling had signed a deal, transferring all rights to my custom-built supplier integration modules, critical components of Nexus Core, to a third-party vendor. A small, recently formed startup called Synergy Systems. A quick search revealed the founders, Vance's former classmates from Stanford. They weren't just pushing me out. They were actively dismantling everything I had built piece by piece and selling off the valuable components to Vance's cronies before the Apex global acquisition even closed. This was outright theft, cloaked in corporate jargon. White-collar crime, plain and simple. When I instinctively tried to access the secure backup servers later that evening, hoping to retrieve definitive proof of my original Nexus core code and the licensing agreement, I found my credentials completely revoked. All doors slammed shut. All right then. Game on. I needed leverage, real leverage, and I needed it fast. Innovatech, under Sterling and Vance's guidance, hadn't just been careless or short-sighted. They had been calculating, methodical, and utterly ruthless. The timeline snapped into sharp focus. Vance had been brought into the company months ago, not just as a potential successor, but as an infiltrator. He'd been studying my systems, mapping my knowledge, preparing to replace me while simultaneously orchestrating the carve-out and sale of my most valuable intellectual property. My quiet departure wasn't enough. They wanted to profit from my innovations while erasing my contribution entirely. That night, fueled by cold fury and adrenaline, I reached out to Kenji Tanaka. Kenji was a freelance cybersecurity and digital forensics specialist I'd worked with on a complex project years ago. Brilliant, discreet, and operating in the ethically gray areas of information gathering. We met late, after midnight, at Mel's 24/7 diner, a classic greasy spoon off the highway near O'Hare. It was the kind of place Sterling or Vance would never dream of setting foot in. Over lukewarm coffee and fluorescent lighting, I laid out the entire situation. The dismissal, Vance, the strange access logs, the supplier agreement, the revoked credentials. "You're definitely in a tough spot, Alex," Kenji said thoughtfully after I finished, stirring his coffee slowly. He had a knack for understatement. But the timing still feels abrupt. Why push you out so aggressively right now? Especially if, as you say, the company's fundamentally doing well and relying on your systems? That's the million-dollar question, I admitted, rubbing my tired eyes. It doesn't make logical sense unless there's a bigger picture I'm missing. Let me dig around a bit, Kenji offered, tapping his fingers on the Formica tabletop. Strictly legal and ethical information gathering, of course. Public records, industry chatter, network analysis. See if anything shakes loose. 2 days later, my phone buzzed late at night, close to 11 p.m. It was Kenji. "You need to see this, Alex. Now." His voice was urgent. He'd struck gold. He had unearthed recent, detailed SEC filings, documents not yet widely circulated, showing that Innovatech Solutions was in the final, confidential stages of being acquired by Apex Global Enterprises, a massive manufacturing conglomerate based out east. The deal was apparently contingent on Innovatech demonstrating both modernized technical infrastructure and transitional next-generation leadership. My ousting and Vance's installation were prerequisites for the sale. They're cleaning house, Alex, making the company look sleek and forward-thinking to maximize the sale price, Kenji explained grimly over the secure line. And guess what? Your Nexus core systems are explicitly listed as a major asset, a key selling point in the acquisition documents. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The valuation report specifically highlights the proprietary, highly efficient manufacturing management interface. My Nexus core. The system they were simultaneously claiming I didn't own while using it to inflate their company's value. And there's more, Kenji continued, his voice dropping lower. Walter Harrington, your Mr. Harrington, cashed out the vast majority of his personal shares last quarter, before the acquisition talks intensified. This deal primarily benefits Sterling and the current executive team. They all get massive golden parachutes, plus lucrative executive positions retained at Apex Global post-acquisition. It was a meticulously planned heist, orchestrated from the top down. But the piece of information that finally broke through my controlled anger, the discovery that felt like a physical blow, wasn't the acquisition itself. It was Kenji forwarding me internal emails he'd managed to recover, dated over 6 months prior. Emails between Sterling and Mr. Harrington explicitly discussing the plan to replace me with Vance. These discussions were happening while I was pulling consecutive all-nighters in the server room, successfully mitigating a major external security breach that threatened to cripple the entire company. While I was saving their asses, they were calmly plotting my removal and interviewing my replacement. The betrayal was absolute. I drove numbly to the old, semi-abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of Evanston. It was where I'd first sketched out the initial architecture for Nexus Core years ago, back when it was just a personal side project, an idea fueled by frustration with existing clumsy systems. I just sat there in my car for hours, watching the pre-dawn sky slowly turn a bleak, unforgiving gray over the decaying warehouses. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant rumble of the first morning trains. When I finally got home, exhausted but strangely resolute, I started digging through boxes in my closet. After an hour of searching, I found it, an old external hard drive I hadn't touched in years. My heart pounded as I plugged it into my laptop. And there it was, the original, pre-Innovatech source code for Nexus Core. Time-stamped documentation clearly showing I had begun development a full 8 months before my Innovatech start date. I also found the crucial emails I'd saved from my first few weeks at the company, Sterling specifically requesting in writing that I integrate my promising Nexus Core tool with Innovatech's existing systems. His clear acknowledgement back then that it was my proprietary tool. His explicit promise documented that we would formalize the ownership and licensing properly once things settled down after the post-ransomware recovery chaos. A promise conveniently forgotten. I had trusted him. Fool me once. The next day, I was summoned to another meeting. Vance called me into Sterling's office where Ms. Reed was already waiting. The atmosphere was frigid. "Alex, we're accelerating the transition timeline," Sterling announced abruptly, without preamble. He didn't even make eye contact. "Your final day with Innovatech Solutions will be next Friday. 2 weeks' notice, instead of the initially promised 6. They were pushing me out the door as fast as possible. "I see," I replied calmly. "Any particular reason for this sudden change?" "Julian has demonstrated exceptional capability and is ready to assume full responsibility immediately," Ms. Reed interjected smoothly, her voice polished and insincere. "Frankly, Alex, your recent attitude hasn't been conducive to a smooth and collaborative handover process." "My attitude?" "My refusal to passively accept the theft of my life's work was deemed uncooperative." I nodded slowly, absorbing the final insult. "I understand. We'll need you to complete all remaining documentation and knowledge transfer sessions by Wednesday, Vance added, clearly relishing his newfound authority. Of course, I replied, my voice perfectly steady. I met Sterling's gaze across the table. And the outstanding matter of the ownership and licensing of Nexus Core? Have you had time to review the original agreements and correspondence I mentioned? Sterling's expression hardened instantly, his earlier discomfort replaced by undisguised hostility. Our legal team has thoroughly reviewed the situation, Alex, he stated coldly. They have determined definitively that all integrated systems, including Nexus Core, fall under unequivocal company ownership as per your employment contract. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The separation package we're offering is generous, considering the circumstances. I strongly suggest you take it and move on. I stood up slowly, gathering my things. I will need to have my lawyer review everything thoroughly before signing anything, I stated calmly. Don't make this difficult, Alex, Sterling warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. It won't change the ultimate outcome. As I walked out of his office, leaving the three of them behind, I pulled out my phone and sent a single, encrypted text message to Miguel. Plan B. Execute tonight. 7 hours later, under the flickering fluorescent lights of a deserted grocery store parking lot miles away, Miguel handed me a small, encrypted flash drive. His face was pale, his hands unsteady. Everything you asked for, Alex, he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Original Nexus Core codebases from the internal archive, deployment logs, system authentication keys. The works. I took the drive, the small piece of plastic feeling heavy with significance. Thank you, Miguel. You know the risk you took. I paused, then asked the question that had been bothering me. Why are you doing this? Why help me? He finally looked me directly in the eye, his expression a mixture of fear and defiance. Because they think we're all just replaceable cogs in their machine, Alex, he said quietly, but fiercely. They forget we're the ones who actually build and maintain the damn machine. I spent the entire weekend meticulously organizing the evidence, preparing my counteroffensive. The original Nexus Core code, the time-stamped development files, the emails with Sterling explicitly acknowledging my ownership and licensing intent, the formal licensing agreement draft I had sent him years ago which he never signed, the dates, the technical specifications, everything needed to prove, unequivocally, that I had developed the core technology long before joining Innovatech. Monday morning, I arrived at the office deliberately early. I found Chloe already at her desk, looking exhausted and stressed. You heard about the accelerated timeline? She asked quietly as I approached. I nodded grimly. How's the team taking it? Not well, she sighed, lowering her voice. Vance called emergency planning sessions all weekend, demanded detailed explanations of Nexus Core's deepest functions. He apparently tried to personally reverse engineer your primary monitoring system late Saturday night. She leaned closer. It didn't go well, Alex, at all. What happened? 3 critical alerts from the main production floor got completely missed. He didn't understand the alert protocols. My heart tightened. Was anyone hurt? Any equipment damaged? No, thankfully. Pure luck. But they had to execute an emergency shutdown of Line 3 for almost 4 hours this morning to manually reset everything. Cost the company about $40,000 in lost production already. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though a cold satisfaction started to bloom in my chest. Sorry to hear that. Chloe hesitated, then looked at me earnestly. Alex, I think I might be next on their list. Why do you say that? Vance has been pointedly asking Sterling if my project manager role is truly necessary now that the core technical leadership is changing. He sees me as loyal to you. I had suspected as much. Chloe knew too much about how things really worked, about the shortcuts and dependencies Vance was oblivious to. She was a threat to his narrative of seamless transition. Chloe, I asked quietly, holding her gaze. Do you trust me? She didn't hesitate for a second. Completely, Alex. You know I do. I discreetly slid a sealed, plain envelope across her desk. If anything happens this week, anything unusual, any unexpected system behavior, any sudden problems, open this immediately. It explains everything. That afternoon, I had back-to-back meetings with 3 different patent attorneys specializing in software and intellectual property law. I paid substantial rush fees to file multiple provisional patents covering the key, unique architectural aspects of Nexus Core, not the entire system, but the critical, proprietary algorithms and integration methods that made it uniquely effective for Innovatech's specific manufacturing equipment. The secret sauce. On Tuesday, I played the role of the model departing employee. I meticulously completed all the transition documentation Vance requested, painstakingly detailing standard operating procedures while strategically omitting the crucial undocumented nuances. I attended his final knowledge transfer meeting, answered his often misguided questions politely, and offered vague assurances of the system's stability. Meanwhile, Kenji was discreetly helping me set up a secure, hardened server infrastructure completely off-site, hosted in a neutral data center overseas. By midnight Tuesday, I had successfully transferred all my original code, the newly patented modules, and supporting documentation to this secure location. I created a fully functional, standalone version of Nexus Core that could run entirely independently of Innovatech's internal infrastructure. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected development. An email appeared in my personal inbox from a senior vice president at Apex Global Industries, the acquiring company. It was a polite, formal invitation to discuss mutual business interests at their regional headquarters in Chicago. They had apparently heard through industry channels that I might be leaving Innovatech soon and were keenly interested in potentially leveraging my unique expertise in manufacturing IT systems. Someone at Apex Global was clearly hedging their bets, perhaps already aware of Vance's incompetence or Sterling's duplicity. Interesting. I immediately forwarded the email to my lawyer, then made a direct call to the Apex Global VP of Operations myself. I politely suggested we schedule a meeting for the week after my official departure from Innovatech. He agreed instantly, sounding genuinely pleased. That night, Wednesday, under the cloak of remote access using the secure credentials Miguel had preserved, I executed the final, critical part of my plan. I logged into the live Nexus Core system at Innovatech one last time. Working carefully, I updated 3 small, but absolutely critical components deep within the system's core. First, I embedded a digital signature verification check. This would automatically scan the core code modules at regular intervals. If it detected any unauthorized modifications, like, say, someone clumsily trying to remove licensing checks or alter core functions, it would trigger a system halt. Second, and most importantly, I updated the embedded software license key itself. I set it to expire cleanly, without ambiguity, in exactly 8 days. This date precisely coincided with the Monday morning following my official departure date. It wasn't sabotage. It was enforcing the license agreement they refused to honor. I created a clean, legal, documented transition path. The system would continue functioning perfectly if a proper, valid licensing agreement was digitally signed and applied before the deadline. If not, the system would simply cease to function as designed. Nothing destructive, nothing malicious, just protecting what was legally and ethically mine. On Thursday, my second to last day, Vance pulled me into his new, larger office, my old office. He leaned back in the chair, attempting an authoritative pose. "Some of the team members have mentioned you've been acting strangely this week, Alex," he said, trying to sound intimidating. "Anything I should be aware of before you leave?" "Just focused on wrapping everything up properly," I replied calmly, meeting his suspicious gaze without flinching. "Ensuring a clean handover." He studied me for a long moment, suspicion warring with his innate arrogance. "Well, just so you know, we'll be changing all system passwords and revoking all outgoing access credentials tomorrow afternoon immediately following your departure," he announced. "Standard security procedure. Makes perfect sense. I agreed readily. Though, of course, such changes won't affect the core operational functionality of the Nexus core system itself. I paused deliberately. Meaning? Vance prompted, narrowing his eyes. Just that the system is designed for high availability and resilience, I explained smoothly. It's architected to continue working reliably regardless of routine administrative changes like password updates. That's the inherent beauty of its robust design. I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he tried to decide if I was subtly threatening him or just stating a technical fact. He ultimately chose wrong, blinded by his own perceived superiority. Right. Well, I think we're good here then. He dismissed me curtly. Legal will meet with you tomorrow morning for the final separation paperwork. As I walked out, I passed Sterling in the hallway. He barely offered a nod, his eyes skittering away, unable to meet my gaze. 11 years of dedication reduced to an awkward, dismissive non-acknowledgement in a corridor. By midnight Thursday, everything was irrevocably in place. I sent one final, encrypted command sequence from my personal laptop to my secure offsite server. Verification sequence Alpha 7 complete. Initiate countdown. The clock had started ticking. Friday morning arrived. My last day. I turned in my company ID badge and laptop, signed the final exit paperwork under the watchful eye of Ms. Reed and a stony-faced corporate lawyer. I politely declined the awkward farewell celebration lunch Vance had half-heartedly organized, much to Sterling's visible relief. As I walked towards the parking lot, leaving Innovatech Solutions behind for the last time, my personal cell phone rang. It was Miguel. "It's done, Alex," he said, his voice hushed. Vance just initiated the global change for all admin passwords across the network. We're locking everything down. He paused. They're planning a full system architecture review this afternoon, trying to map everything out themselves. Thanks for the heads up, Miguel, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the tension coiling in my gut. What? What happens now? Miguel asked hesitantly. Now, I replied, taking a deep breath as I got into my car. We wait. I spent the weekend entirely at home, disconnecting from work completely. I ignored calls from unknown numbers, screened messages ruthlessly. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, deeply, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The storm had passed. The next phase was inevitable. Monday morning arrived, crisp and clear. At precisely 9:17 a.m., the exact moment the main production floors typically shifted into peak operational load after the morning briefings, it began. Across all three of Innovatech's manufacturing facilities, on every single terminal running the Nexus core interface, the screen flickered, then displayed the same stark message. License expired. Please contact the developer Alexander. Contact info to renew. System functionality will be suspended pending license validation. Renewal deadline date 8 days from today. By 9:20 a.m., the first automated production line shuddered to a halt. By 9:45 a.m., reports of system-wide failures were flooding the internal help desk. By 10:30 a.m., all three Innovatech facilities were effectively offline, production ground to a complete standstill. Chaos erupted. At precisely 10:30 a.m., my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Sterling's private number. Alex, what the hell did you do? He bypassed any greeting, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, though he was clearly trying to sound authoritative. I didn't do anything, Sterling, I replied calmly, injecting a note of mild surprise into my voice. It appears the software license for Nexus Core has simply expired. I paused for effect. As the original developer and legal owner of the Nexus Core intellectual property, I'm naturally happy to discuss potential renewal terms with Innovatech. This is sabotage. You planned this, he hissed, his voice cracking under the strain. It's standard software license management, Sterling, I corrected him gently. Perhaps you should check the original integration agreement we signed 11 years ago? Clause 7, I believe. It specifically states that Innovatech was licensing the core technology, not purchasing it outright. Silence crackled on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him scrambling, yelling for legal. I've already taken the liberty of sending a formal licensing agreement proposal to your legal department. I continued smoothly. The terms are quite straightforward, and, I believe, fair. Number 1. Formal written acknowledgement of my sole ownership of the Nexus Core IP. Number 2. Appropriate financial compensation for its continued use, reflecting its true market value. And number 3. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific circumstances surrounding my recent departure. That's extortion, Sterling spluttered, losing his composure completely. No, Sterling, I replied, my voice dropping slightly, echoing his words from our lunch. That's business. I paused, letting the silence stretch before adding softly. These things happen. Click. I ended the call. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, Innovatech's frantic lawyers, facing mounting pressure from the paralyzed operations and the impending Apex Global deal, had thoroughly reviewed my meticulously prepared documentation, the original code, the emails, the patent filings. They had no choice but to acknowledge the validity of my claim. By 5 p.m., after hurried negotiations between my lawyer and theirs, the comprehensive licensing and settlement agreement was signed, electronically and securely. 3 days later, I sat across a polished mahogany table from the Senior Vice President of Operations for Apex Global Enterprises in their gleaming downtown Chicago office tower. He slid a thick contract across the table towards me. We're still proceeding with the acquisition of Innovatech Solutions, he stated frankly. Frankly, their leadership team left us with some concerns during this recent disruption. He met my gaze directly. But we recognize the critical importance of the Nexus core system. Therefore, we want you, Mr. Alexander, to lead the technical integration post-acquisition, not as an employee of the acquired entity, but as an independent, highly compensated consultant reporting directly to Apex Global. The proposed consulting salary was nearly double what Innovatech had been paying me, with full autonomy over my working hours, location, and approach. A separate clause outlined generous performance bonuses tied to the successful integration and enhancement of Nexus Core. What about Julian Vance? I asked casually, curious about the fate of my would-be replacement. The VP's expression soured noticeably. Mr. Vance, he said with clear distaste, will be transitioning to other opportunities outside of Apex Global. His skill set wasn't quite aligned with our operational needs. I picked up the pen and signed the lucrative consulting contract that afternoon. 2 weeks later, Miguel called me with an update. Vance had been quietly, unceremoniously removed from his position at Innovatech. The official internal story spun by Sterling was that Vance had decided to pursue other entrepreneurial opportunities. The actual reason, Miguel confirmed, was that 3 of Innovatech's largest, most crucial clients had directly threatened to pull their multi-million-dollar contracts after experiencing repeated system failures and communication breakdowns under Vance's brief, chaotic tenure. Sterling, surprisingly, remained CO through the final stages of the acquisition. However, his new role within Apex Global was largely ceremonial, a face-saving title with no real operational power, no significant team, and an office deliberately located far from the core decision-making centers. He got his golden parachute, but lost all respect and authority. Strangely, I didn't feel the overwhelming sense of vindication I might have expected. Instead, there was just a quiet, profound certainty that I had done what was necessary, not just for myself, but to uphold the principle of valuing skill and contribution over connections and deceit. I had defended my work, my intellectual property, my worth. The following month, I used the substantial first installment of my Apex Global consulting fees to make a down payment on a sleek, modern condominium overlooking Lake Michigan in Chicago. Nothing ostentatious, but a quiet, comfortable space with a wide balcony offering panoramic views of the water and the city skyline. A place where I could watch the sunset paint the sky and see the city lights reflected on the lake, finally feeling at peace. Chloe Davis joined my newly formed consulting company, Nexus Strategicite, 3 months later, eagerly accepting the role of Chief Operating Officer. Then Miguel Ortiz came aboard as Chief Technology Officer. Eventually, nearly half of my old core team from Innovatech, disillusioned by the lingering effects of Sterling and Vance's mismanagement, joined us. They weren't just employees. They were partners in a rapidly growing, highly respected boutique firm specializing in complex manufacturing IT solutions. About a year after the Innovatech debacle, I ran into Sterling unexpectedly at a large IT industry conference being held downtown at McCormick Place. He was standing alone near the exhibitors hall, looking distinctly out of place. He started to turn away when he saw me, then seemed to reconsider, stopping and walking slowly over to where I stood talking with a potential client. He waited until the client left. "Alex," he began awkwardly. "You won." He said it simply, flatly, like stating an undeniable fact. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a year. The strain was evident around his eyes, deeper lines etched into his face. His expensive suit seemed slightly rumpled, his former aura of confident authority completely gone. He looked diminished. "It wasn't ever about winning, Sterling," I replied quietly, and I realized with absolute certainty that I meant it. It wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about value, I continued, holding his gaze. About knowing what your work, your contributions, are truly worth, and ensuring others recognize it too. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking away, disappearing into the anonymous conference crowd. I stood there for a long time after he left, watching the bustling activity of the conference flow around me. My thoughts drifted, contemplating the complex systems we build in our lives, the technical ones, the professional ones, the personal ones. Thinking about the ones we nurture, the ones we are forced to break, and the enduring ones, built on integrity and true value, that ultimately outlast us all.